Welcome back. This week, I don't know what's happening. Hello and welcome. What the fuck? Hello and welcome to the debut episode. Oh, son of a bitch. All right, I can't look at Emily. We'll just restart that. Bloop, 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 bloop. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the debut podcast of Three's a Crime, a True Crime podcast. I'm Tori.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Lindsey.
And that's our intro.
Here we are professional podcasters.
We're podcasters, bitches.
That lives here. Her name is Yippee, and she causes mischief in my home.
I have a portal in my house where things come in and out all the time. I had a lady named Linda who didn't live in my house, but she had died in kind of the general area. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time. So my ex-friend Ashley was living with me at the time, and we had just had a huge blowout fight, and I had gone in my room. And I was laying down in my bed and I had cried and whatever. And then all of a sudden I heard, "Oh, hello." And I was like, "Ashley?" And I got up and walked around the whole fucking house and nobody was there. And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Oh, hello."
That creeps me out. I like that.
So for our first story, we decided we needed to do something local. And Spokane has its very own serial killer. So today, we're going to be talking about Robert Lee Yates Jr. So, but before we can talk about Yates, we have to talk about the little side story, which probably wouldn't have been a big deal in the grand scheme of things if he hadn't been murdering people. But we're going to talk about Novella Yates, which is his grandmother. Novella was married to John, who was a farmer. They had 10 children, one of whom was Robert Lee Yates Sr. So in October of 1945, Novella decided that she was going to murder John with an axe. And I actually had to write down the way that the Southern Standard actually reported it, because just the way that it was written So it says, "She was in her bare feet. There had been a light frost and the trees were beginning to turn a patchy gold. Cradling the axe squarely in her arms, police say she returned to the house, closed the door quietly, and went into the bedroom where her husband, John, who was 55, slept. In seconds, she brought the axe down on her husband's head, striking him a total of 4 times. Miraculously, 3 of the 4 wounds were not serious. Now, the 4th blow slashed the entire right side of his head, penetrating his brain."
She just woke up one day and was like, "You know what I want to do today? This coffee is really bitter. You know who fucking made it?
Yeah.
That John." Today was the fucking day. 10 kids will do that. I'd kill my husband if he gave me 10 kids too.
Yeah.
Novella was arrested and charged with felonious assault, but she was then released on a $3,000 bond. But in 1945, would have been about $43,000. So and it doesn't say who bailed her out, but she was bailed out. There weren't any records that she was taken to trial, but she was indicted on first-degree murder. So she was sent to a mental institution, and she was eventually released. It doesn't say how long she was there. She never remarried. She died in 1972 at the age of 79 from a lingering illness, whatever that means. Here's what I found really interesting, and it's just a small detail, but I was like, really? I found her obituary, and in her obituary, it lists out, preceded in death by her husband, John. And I'm like, that's so, that's a normal thing to be in an obituary, to say, oh, this person, she's preceded in death by her parents or her husband or whatever. But it was just weird that they listed him, given that, she had murdered him with an axe.
Yeah.
And I did this old school on paper, so you're going to hear my papers are rustling.
We did our book reports.
We did my book report. My report today is on Robert Lee Yates Jr.
F. Oh shit. Fuck.
Robert Lee Yates was born on May 27th, 1952 to Robert Lee Yates Sr. and Anna Marie Yates, and grew up in Oak Harbor, Washington, which I'm not entirely sure where that is, but that's coastal, right?
Seattle,
Around Seattle?
Seattle is more islands and
I was going to say, I think it's an island.
It's
Gotcha.
there.
So at about age 6 or 7, Yates claims to have been sexually molested by a neighbor boy who was about 11. I'm very pro believing victims, but I do want to just mention that he did not bring up this allegation until he was arrested. Now, that's not uncommon for sexual assault survivors to not disclose or to wait many, many years to disclose. But I'm just putting it out there. From all accounts, he grew up in a loving home. He was raised Seventh-day Adventist. He was a good student and apparently was very involved with sports, was a good baseball player. Had girlfriends in high school, seemed relatively normal. He married his first wife in August of 1972. He had separated from her by March of 1974, so it was about 18 months, because his soon-to-be second wife was already pregnant.
Oh, he's a treat already.
Yeah.
He is a treat. During this time, he got an associate's degree from Skagit Valley College, community college, and then went on to attend Walla Walla, which I believe is where he met his second wife, and they became involved.
Side note,
Yeah.
I've been to Skagit Speedway, and I sat in Casey Kane's car, who is now a NASCAR driver, so it's not a big deal. I am basically a celebrity, but I have a photo somewhere. I'll ask my mom for it.
We'll post it.
In July of 1974, he married his second wife, but this was annulled because he wasn't divorced from the first wife yet.
He's a fake.
We're seeing here that, December of 1974, his first child, who was a girl, was born. I'm going to be really careful here, and I'm not intentionally not using the names of his wife or his children, because some of them, I believe, still live in the area. So then in the summer of 1975, he took a job at the Washington State Penitentiary, which is hilarious because that's where he is now. Some reports say that he was there for 3 to 4 months, and some say that he was there working as a guard for up to 6 months. During the summer, so it was July 13th, 1975, he kills his first 2 victims. So we've got Susan Savage, 22, and Patrick Oliver, who was 21. So Susan had just graduated from Walla Walla University, and Patrick also was a recent graduate. He was pre-med, honor roll, super smart guy. This is the only man. This is very different from any of his other crimes and wasn't linked to him for like 25, 30 years because it was so different than any of his other crimes until he admitted that it was him. I mean, so Patrick Oliver had just gotten back from Europe. So, the FBI was looking into this, and Interpol, because he had just gotten back from Europe. So they were trying to find any kind of connection that they could, because there was literally no motive for this crime. So Yates was apparently in the area target shooting, which was something that he did apparently fairly frequently. The bodies were found on the very next day. They were dragged to a wooden area, which was about 30 yards, and he actually drug them across the river, posed them, and then covered them up with some debris and brush that were around. There was no indication of sexual assault in this crime, but he posed them like on top of each other, and all accounts say these two people were just friends. I think she was partially clothed, but it seems to be something that, unlike his other crimes, which we'll get to later, where he was literally hunting his victims, that he probably just came upon them and made this decision split second to do this. When they interviewed him, he defends himself a lot of times by saying that these people made him mad, or they tried to rush him, or they tried to do something. So it makes sense to me that if he was watching them expecting that they were going to do something and then didn't, that would have irritated him in some way. Yeah. So shortly after the murder, Yates quits the prison. And I think that's why the length of time kind of varies with people about, well, how long did he actually work there? But it was very shortly after the murders, and he moved the family out of town. And I think, that was obviously to distance himself from his crimes. There's a timeline that was put together by, I think it's Radford University, that you can, and this is where this information came from, because I couldn't find it necessarily elsewhere. But 1975, we see the first kind of indication of his sort of pettiness and aggressiveness, that he was working at a job at Pantrol, but not the one that was in Spokane. And apparently he had gotten into some kind of a disagreement with a coworker, and then just in retaliation rubbed feces on the door of the office. And it does not specify where the feces came from. I knew that was going to be your first question, which is why I said that.
Provided.
Yes. So I'm not sure if it was animal or human, but that was kind of
a pile of shit and was like, who pissed me off the other day?
So fucking petty.
Let me get
this.
this.
He's petty as hell.
He has a habit of taking jobs and really only being able to work for a few months before either he leaves or gets asked to leave. So in 1976, he actually marries his second wife legally, now that he's officially divorced. But in the same year, his mother dies of cancer. In 1977, he enlisted in the Army, and his second daughter was born. Now, by all accounts, he does very well in the military. He was in the military for 18 years. Wow. He was all over the place. He was in Fort Rucker, Alabama, a few times. He was in Germany. Now, he claims that while he was in the military, specifically when he was in Fort Rucker, Alabama, that he was, quote unquote, too busy to be murdering people. And he did, in 2000, take a lie detector test to see if, for all these times, because there is a huge gap where there are people that are thought to be victims of his, but he did not admit to, or they can't prove. I read that there are some in Germany, then other places say, well, no, there aren't any crimes that match here in Germany. And according to the Spokane Police Department, he passed that polygraph. But our local newspaper, the Spokesman Review, got a copy of that and independently went to the people that read polygraph, and it came back as inconclusive. And the other thing is, his first crime, the first murders were so very different, and you don't change your MO that much over, you just decide to go back to it 20 years later, and now you're killing people in a completely different way. And he does have some signature traits that were found in some of these other places. In 1989, his son was born. So he had 5 children, 4 of them girls. He only had 1 son. And just to give a little background of him as a parent, a lot of times he was away. And at one point, I think when he was sent to Germany, his wife was like, we're not going to go. We're going to go stay with our family and her family in Walla Walla.
Walla Walla is where sweet onions come from.
So after his son's born, he admits that he starts neglecting his daughters. And he does have, from the outside, people thought that he looked like he was this great family man. But apparently he kind of ran his house very much like a dictatorship. And at one point, and I don't remember where in the timeline this happens, but his wife did leave him. And I think this was before the son was born, but she said that the girls were just like, they wanted their dad. They didn't want to be poor anymore because she was a single parent now trying to raise these kids. And so she ended up going back to him. But it's really interesting that there are a lot of, there's apparently research that's been done with serial killers who have children, that they tend to favor the child that is the same gender as they are. And it's,
well, I don't know, like this guy too, he obviously hated.
Oh yeah, he
women,
clearly, not a fan.
Not a fan. So.
And he claims that he had like an unusual relationship with his mother, but doesn't really define what that is. And I think that his father has kind of discounted that. Now, who's telling the truth, you know, who knows? I'm going to talk about some of the victims that are listed that he was not arrested for, has not been. So these are the possibles. So Yolanda Sapp was 26. She disappeared 2 days before her body was found. She was last seen wearing black jeans, black shoes, a black shirt, and a beige rabbit fur coat, none of which were found with her body. Also missing were 9 bracelets, a silver chain necklace, her wedding ring, another ring, and her purse.
Oh, she was married.
Yeah, apparently. Then in March of 1990, and this is part of that gap that they say he wasn't doing anything.
Was this in Spokane too?
Yeah, these were in Spokane. So March of 1990, they found Nikki Lowe, who was 34. She did have a history of prostitution and drug abuse. They found cocaine in her system. She was shot with a .22, which was, as we will see, one of his main weapons of choice, the caliber. And I want to stop real quick and just say that just because these women were sex workers and they were in a vulnerable position, that they did not deserve this. Nobody deserves this. And he, in particular, preyed on them for the reason that they were in a vulnerable position. And I think probably hoping that they wouldn't be missed.
Yeah. I was listening to, I think it was the Morbid podcast, which if anyone hasn't listened to that, go listen to it because I think it's my favorite podcast. So they said the term for a sex worker who was dead was less dead. They were like less dead than everybody else.
Well, and I mean, I think that that's the way that law enforcement, no offense, kind of looks at them. Like, you live a high-risk lifestyle. It's not that you're asking for it, but you shouldn't be surprised when it happens. Especially when you look at things like, you know, how the case was handled with Peter Sutcliffe, who was the Yorkshire Ripper. I mean, even the way that the police talked about it, and it was reported in the press, until a girl was murdered who was not a sex worker, they didn't care. So the next victim was Kathleen Brisboe, is what I'm going to go with, 38. She was found nude, except for her rings, on the banks of the Spokane River. She had been shot, but also had contusions and lacerations on her head, which led the police to believe she had been struck with a blunt object. Kathleen had heroin and cocaine in her system. And one of the things that Yates later admitted was that, you know, kind of his deal was to pick up prostitutes, do drugs with them, then rob them, then kill them, and then, well, he would also get his money's worth, as he would say. You know, after they had passed. So found at her scene, though, there was female clothing, a pair of shoes, and a plastic bag stained with blood. And that plastic bag is important to remember. They also found a cigarette butt and vegetation that wasn't from the area. And they were able to get tire tracks on that one. The next one they found was in May of 92. This was Sherry Ann Palmer. She was 19. So at that point in time, she was the youngest. And he was not charged in this case. But they found articles of clothing in her arms, a plastic bag over her head. Her shoes and articles of clothing were found nearby her body. They did find a bullet, but no spent casings. Her cause of death was a gunshot. And they were actually able to remove an entire bullet from her body that was still intact. And they were able to get hair fiber and orifice swabs. But there was no sign of struggle. There was no pooling. And it was clear that she had been murdered somewhere and then dumped in a different location. She was last seen leaving a motel, Al's Motel, that's over.
Isn't that over
it's
by?
no longer.
Yeah.
It's being torn down and redone. But
Well,
it's like,
thank
Al's
fuck.
Motel?
you
I'm
know
gonna
where
get a picture of it.
people are gonna love.
Is this where over by the dog park?
Pizza Pipeline Bar. Like down
on
Division,
Division.
next to Apex and Lovely. It's next to
Yeah, I
two
totally
H-ups.
know where you're talking about.
It's right there. It's like
It's
the
a
middle
hotel?
of Division towards
Oh,
the,
gotcha. We'll
It's no
take a
longer
screenshot
that.
of that and put that up on our
Yeah.
Instagram in case you want to see what Al's Motel looks like. Anyway, she had left in a cab to go meet her boyfriend, but never showed up. She did have a history of sex work, but she wasn't known to use drugs, so that was a little bit different. So then in 1995, in Kitsap County, north of Seattle, Kitsap, they found Patricia Barnes, who was 60. So this dude's age range is, whatever.
all over.
She was also partially covered with foliage that had been brought in from another location. So this is starting to become kind of one of his deals. In June of 1996, Shannon Zielinski, who was 39, was found. She was found clothed in the dress that she had disappeared in several weeks before. A towel was draped over her torso. They found a shell casing, but again, there was no sign of struggle. So it was clear that she had been killed in one location, dumped in another. She was too badly decomposed to test to see if she had any drugs in her system, and they had to identify her by her fingerprints because no purse or any identification was found with her. Oh. The next victim, Jennifer Joseph, was only 16 years old. And I do believe that she was officially the youngest that we know of Yates's victims. She was found in August of 1997. And I was thinking about this when I was researching that in August of 1997, I was 17. I was a year older than her. Jennifer had a close range gunshot to her chest. They were able to collect DNA from her body scene area, which was eventually later on matched to Yates. After that was Darla Sue Scott. She was 29. She was known to be a sex worker in the area. She was found in November of 1997 by a man walking his dog. So if you want to talk about irrational fears, that is one of mine, that I'm going to at some point come upon a dead body.
See, that is not my fear. That's okay. This is going to sound like a terrible sentence. That's my dream is to see someone's hand sticking out of the ground and someone's like, oh my God, is that a mannequin? And have me say, it's never a mannequin.
So Darla passed away from 2 shots to the head. And this is again why the plastic bags come up. 2 plastic bags over her head found in a shallow grave. Now, this is the first one of the known victims where we really see the plastic bag popping up again. Mm-hmm. DNA on her body also ended up matching Yates. Melinda Mercer was 24. She was found in December of 1997 in Tacoma. She suffered 3 shots and had 4 plastic bags over her head. She had turned to sex work the month before to support her heroin addiction. She was last seen leaving a tavern on Aurora Avenue in Tacoma to make money specifically for a heroin buy. The next morning, they found her nude body in a blackberry bush in a vacant lot, which apparently was often used in that area for people dumping trash. which again is just such a shitty thing to read because she wasn't trash. That's not, I just, and some of the items that she was known to have with her at the time that she disappeared were not recovered. So again, I'm like, this motherfucker's taking trophies.
Yeah.
But where were they?
Yeah.
Because they did, and we'll get to this, they did find some things at his house, which helped tie him to the case, but not everything.
Probably
And
has, like, it buried somewhere.
probably.
Something like that.
This is the most horrific part of this story, though. Of the 3 shots, only one penetrated her brain, but it did so without affecting the areas that control consciousness or motor response,
Oh,
which means
terrible.
she was completely still aware of what was happening.
Oh,
25 caliber shell casings were found at the scene. Bloodstains on her blouse indicated that she had been standing upright and clothed when she was shot. Mercer's nostrils and upper lip were visible through small tears in the bags, which had showed that she had, again, was alive and breathing when they were placed over her head because they had sucked in.
Ugh.
And they had found on the 2 inner bags that there were some holes, which she had tried to chew through. And, one of the things that I read was, in him placing the bags over the heads, because initially I'm like, again, is that a sign of remorse, or I don't want to look at them, I don't want to look at what I did, or a demoralization of you're not a person if you don't have these features. But I think it really was the idea that if they didn't die right away from the gunshot wounds, he was putting this over their head because it was, making their death faster.
And it
Letting them
would
bleed
control
out.
the blood from the gunshot wound if they were shot.
If
They were shot in the head.
The next victim found was Shawn Johnson. She was 36. She was found December 18th of 1997. Her body was decomposed, so she had been out there long enough for that to have happened. She had 2 shots to the head, 2 plastic bags covering her head, and they were able to get semen samples from her body, which eventually would be matched to Yates. Laurel Wasson was 31. She was found on December 26th, 1997.
Ooh.
And I think about, just
Terrible.
how did the family, the day after Christmas,
How could you ever I feel like you just never celebrate Christmas.
No, yeah. And she was found in a gravel pit. 2 gunshot wounds to the head. There was foreign vegetation, peanut shells, packing styrofoam, and chips of broken concrete. So it was all this weird conglomeration of stuff that was found covering her. They were able to eventually match debris from Yates's yard to this body dump. And semen found in her body, also again, was later able to be matched to Yates. Shawn McClenahan, 39, who was also found on the same day. She was found next to Laurel Wasson. 2 gunshot wounds to the head, 3 plastic bags. DNA from semen matched Yates, and also he had left a fingerprint on one of the bags. Now, at the time that these women were found, they didn't have anything to compare it to yet, but they were able to collect it. And so with Shawn and Laurel, these women are found 30, or they're right next to each other. So I'm like, did he kill them on the same day and dump their bodies the same place? Or did this become a, how some serial killers have a particular dump place where they like to dump their bodies over and over again?
Yeah.
So Sunny Oster was 41. She was found February of 1998 with 2 gunshot wounds to the head, 3 plastic bags, semen on the body matched Yates. So, at this point, he's feeling super comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
He's got his, his,
It's rhythm.
yeah, he's got his rhythm down. The next victim was Laura Mavin, and she was 34. She had been missing since November of 97, but wasn't found until April of 98. Her shallow grave was only 50 yards from where Wasson and McClenahan were found. She had only 1 gunshot wound to plastic bags. Semen in her body also eventually was able to match to Yates. Plant trimmings covered her body were also from Yates's yard. He was bringing this stuff with him.
I wonder if he was was so confident that he thought They're never gonna, because it's not like a public place. They're not gonna like figure out some dude's backyard that like
Right.
Yeah.
nobody brings dirt.
Or,
from
you know,
their
it could have been a
backyard
taunt
and,
to
like,
the
puts it on top
police.
of a crime scene. Or it could have been that. Or he could have just been a dumbass who was dirty all the time.
Or, you know, he was like, oh, hey, I'm going to do this
Hate that
yard
guy.
work. I'll just have it in my car. And then,
I was actually just mowing my lawn, and then I just
or,
kinda
you know,
thought,
maybe he
you know,
wanted to
two
be sure
birds,
that he
one
had
stone.
something with him to be at least able to partially cover the bodies. Who knows? Criminal Perspectives, I think is the name of that podcast, actually has an interview, a 2-part interview with Yates, which is fascinating to listen to. So if this interests you, I would definitely recommend going over there and checking it out. He doesn't really ever give any reason for that I heard for why he was bringing that foreign vegetation with him. One of the things that was really kind of creepy about this particular one is the Kitsap Sun reported that Linda Mavin may have actually been there when they found Laurel Wasson and Sean McClanahan, because there was snow in the area and she was, 30, 50 yards away from where their 2 bodies were. So she may have been there. There's no way that they'll ever be able to tell if she was actually there when they discovered the other 2 bodies or not. So the next victim that was found was Michelle Derning. She was found July 7th of 1998. What I was reading, and I think this was on Murderpedia, but it said she was found under a bath cover, and I'm not sure what a bath cover is. So listeners, if anybody knows. But she was found by a transient in an area that was frequented by sex workers. Hey, Mia.
My hand shook very loudly.
She had a gunshot wound to the head, but what was different about her case is that she wasn't raped and she was murdered where she was found. Also in July of 1998, after the body of Micheline Derning was found, a block north of Pantrol, which is where, when he got to Spokane, where he worked since he had moved here. So he started there in 1998, Yates was pulled over. He gave the officer his name, date of birth, and address, and they let him go. And I believe this was around the time when it was Jennifer Joseph and one that we haven't talked about yet, Heather Hernandez, were murdered. Witnesses had described seeing this white Corvette in the area. And so, they kind of put this bolo out for this white Corvette, and somewhere in the translation, it was changed to Camaro. So in the field research, it said Camaro. So the officers on the street that were doing the checking are looking for a white Camaro, and here's Yates in his white Corvette. Like, how lucky can one asshole be?
Yeah, man. 8 people would have lived.
Yeah.
8.
Yeah. After that incident, Connie LaFontaine Ellis, who was 35, she was found in October of 98 in Tacoma. This was 11 months after the discovery of Mercer. And the body was actually found by a search and rescue dog who was out on a completely unrelated event. She was found 10 feet down an embankment in a green belt that was often used as a dump site. And I believe, again, they were kind of worried that the Green River Killer was back. The degree of decomposition on her body suggested that she had been killed at least a month earlier than when she was found, and probably not long after disappearing. She had a single gunshot wound to the left side of her head with a .25 caliber, and her head was in 3 grocery bags. I mean, he really, and I'm wondering, did he just have them in his car?
Yeah, or did he stay?
Did he, if you looked under my sink, you'd find about 800 of them, because I'm always just I don't know what to do with these. November 9th of 1998, an officer saw Yates pick up Jennifer Robinson, who was a prostitute in the area. He told Robinson to say that he was one of her father's friends, and she complied. So when the cop was like, who are you? The officer, I think, did a quick search, but then he just... Yeah, if you're a sex worker and you get in a car with somebody and you immediately get pulled over by the cops, you don't want to get arrested. And so, if he's like, just tell him I'm a friend of your dad. And he did give his driver's license when the cop asked for it. And so they again just let him go. After these two contacts is when police learned that Yates had owned a white Corvette, which was noticed around the time of the disappearances of Jennifer and Heather. When he was asked to give a DNA sample, he said it was, quote, too extreme of a request for a family man.
Oh my God. Fuck off. Jesus.
Spokane detectives interviewed Yates, who claimed that he never solicited prostitutes and he didn't own any guns. And I'm like, again, which is we'll talk about later. I mean, they certainly, once they arrested him and searched the house, found that stuff in his house. And I'm like, couldn't they have pulled gun permits at that time? Or so in December of 1998, the body of Stacy Hahn, who was 23, was found in Skagit County with a gunshot to her head. Hahn was originally thought to be a Green River victim until Yates confessed, and he was able to describe both the location of where her body was left as well as her injuries. And that's really the only way that they knew, because until he was arrested, she was assumed to be a victim of the Green River Killer.
The Green River Killer was in.
He was
the
in
other side
Seattle.
of the state.
And actually, a lot of his victims that were found kind of more on the west side of the state were you know, I mean, we had two active serial killers in Washington.
Really, Gary Ridgway.
Gary Ridgway,
Yeah.
the Green River Killer, and then
He was
Yates.
only caught a few years ago. Green River Killer was caught like recently. Doing
Yeah.
DNA testing, I think.
Yeah.
Or that was the Golden State Killer. I don't remember. But whatever.
No, Golden State Killer was definitely just caught very recently, but he was in California. We didn't have to worry about him.
Okay.
So the next victim, well, in the meantime, in April of 96 is when Yates officially,
Say that more.
sorry, Emily's having problems
It
with the
sounds
microphone.
better when I turn the mic this way. I can hear it better.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
know why. Sorry.
Choo-choo-choo-choo.
Start your sentence over.
Yeah. So in April of 1996 is when Yates officially moved his family to Spokane. So he had been coming over and murdering our people.
Bros.
Yeah, he came over and murdered some peeps here in Spokane, but he wasn't officially living here until 1996. So the next victim was found in June of 96, and her name was Shannon. So he did admit that he owned a white Corvette. He said that he had sold it to his friend Rita. Now, in the interview on Criminal Perspective, he talks about how, and he thinks that he's so funny. And he's like, I only got caught because I got caught myself, because the cops asked me about the car and I gave it to them. I was honest. Go fuck yourself. So apparently, according to Yates, what had happened was he had been somewhere with his car and some woman came up and was like, "Oh my God, I love your car." And he was like, "Thanks." And she was like, "Hey, if you ever think you want to sell it, here's my card, contact me." So after, he's committed all these murders locally and in Tacoma, and he knows now that the cops are looking for a Camaro and maybe might make this connection, he sells it. And Rita Jones did buy it. He gave him her name and number. So in that respect, he did basically get himself caught, because again, he is a complete narcissist, thinks he's the smartest person in the room. And yeah, I just really don't think that he thought that the cops were going to put it together. Unfortunately for him, they were able to locate the car, and they do some initial testing, and God bless Jennifer Joseph. I mean, so under the seat of the passenger side, and this is after he sold this car to another person. And the first thing I would have done with a new car is like clean the fuck out of that car.
Yeah.
They find under the passenger side seat a mother of pearl button that was missing from her blouse. And then from that, they were also able to locate her blood from within the vehicle and confirm that that was her. So that gave them the ability to arrest him.
Poor Rita.
It was her dream car, and she was so upset, but she was able to sell it and get all of her money back.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
well, I would sell.
But like she didn't lose any money, so
Right.
But
good job, Rita.
again,
But
God
you
bless her,
that
'cause
fucking sucks.
Can you imagine the cop showing up at your house and saying, "Hey, we need to look at, can we take a look in your car? We suspect that people may have been murdered in it." And then when the cops take your car, especially when they're, well, and I do not know this from personal experience, just from listening to other stories, but, when they take your car and they process it for evidence, it's not like you get it back anytime. And so if that's your only mode of transportation, if you ever get it back. But, thankfully she was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll cooperate, take the car, do whatever you want. And they were able to find that. We're gonna kind of back up because we're kind of getting right up to the point where Yates was arrested. But I want to talk about Christine Smith, who was 32. She's the only known survivor.
Oh, wow. She's a
And
bad bitch.
yeah, she is a badass.
She's a bad bitch.
So Smith had agreed to oral sex with Yates for $40 in the back of his van. And at this point, he's driving a black van, which, and this is like, oh, this just gives me the chills, that he had built a platform bed and covered with carpet in the back of his van, his black van, where I'm like, if you're Mrs. Yates, you're not like, why do you need, I mean, I'm sure he probably had an excuse, but I once dated a guy who had a van and it had shag carpet on the inside and they called it the Shag and Wagon. And he worked for his dad and their job was to clean up crime scenes. And I hated riding even in that car. But anyway, so when she gets in the car, she asks him, hey, are you the psycho that's killing women? And when you hear Yates talk about this, and again, I'm going to say, fuck this guy. He's like, what a stupid fucking question. Like, well, he didn't say fucking, but he's like, what a stupid question. Like, I'm like, what am I going to do? Say yes. And what he told her was, of course not. I'm a family man with 5 children. I couldn't do that. Like, I couldn't be that guy. Ooh. Anyway, it just, his sort of indignant, like, how stupid can you be? Just really chapped my ass. When he talks about the situation, and one of the main reasons that he gives in talking about all of his victims that he shot, because he visited tons of other prostitutes that he didn't murder, was that, they tried to rush him. He was paying like good money for this. If you're having a sexual encounter, you want it to last as long as possible, at least 10 or 15 minutes. Like, he was being rushed. And I believe with Christine Smith, the part of the problem is he couldn't get hard. And I think at this point he couldn't. And one of the criminal perspectives does an interview after the Yates with a psychologist or psychiatrist who talks about the fact, the necrophilia, and with Yates, and about how, like, dude, you had to be able to get hard to do it. So, and later on, after he's caught and everything, he does try to use that necrophilia, or I can't remember what the verbiage they use is, but as his defense, like, clearly I'm crazy.
I'm insanity plea.
Yeah, and it actually didn't work out in his favor to make that claim.
He's like telling everyone that he's a fucking family man, and then he's like, actually, I'm insane.
I'm a family man.
I was lying the whole time.
So, I mean, that's the thing. And I think that that's probably why he couldn't maybe get hard at that point, is that she was alive. So he claims that she rushed him, and that's why she did it. And he was rude, because he was just like, the ones that I let go, like, they were always very nice to me. And there's a true crime documentary on YouTube that you can watch where they actually interview one of the sex workers who had gone on dates with Yates. And she talks about, he was funny and nice, and, he was attractive, and that, that he always paid well. And she had seen him several times. Like, she had his phone number. She contacted him at work. Our special guest star is needing some loves and attention. We will definitely make sure that we have a picture of our special guest star on our Instagram page. But, one of the reasons why Smith got in the car is, he was calm. He was sober. He was, again, so freaking normal, apparently. So anyway, Yates gets mad at her. He shoots her in the head. Now, she is immediately, disoriented, which she just got shot in her head. But she doesn't die. But she doesn't die. She's awake and alert, and Yates tries to rob her, demands that she give him her money, but is somehow able to get out of the vehicle. And even in the interview, Yates can't explain why he just let her go. I mean, he could have followed her. He could have whatever. And she thought that she had been hit in the head with a hammer. She had no idea. So she goes to the hospital. They misdiagnose it as a knife wound, give her 3 stitches, and she goes along her merry way. Then in 2000, she gets into a car accident, which requires her to need a CT scan. And that's when they see the debris in her head from the gunshot. So then Yates gets arrested. And, it's on the news that he's been arrested. And she's like, holy fucking shit. This is the guy that shot me in my head and came forward. And that was another really strong piece of evidence against Yates.
I wonder why he did let her go, because he said that they were in the back seat and she climbed into the front seat and got out the passenger side. That has to take kind of a long time, and you're sitting directly next to someone and you're just he would have had time.
It's weird because all of his victims, some were shot once and some were shot 3 or 4 times. And, even back when he shot Oliver Patrick and Susan, they both, so they died from gunshots in the head, but they both had defensive wounds and whatnot on their arms, showing that they had tried to deflect the shots. And I think that there was an element of, and again, my personal opinion, but if he shot them once and they immediately died, I don't know that was fun for him. Yeah. And so there were some, I think maybe he wanted to, as he went along, kind of wanted to see. And I think that the fact that she didn't die after he shot her at fairly close range in the head, and she's still stumbling around, I think he was just watching because he was fascinated.
I think he also probably had a God complex of you're going to live because I'm going to let you live. I'm going to let you live. I shot you in the head, but you lived.
Yates was officially arrested in April of 1999 for the murder of Jennifer Joseph. And at that time, she was the only one that they were charging him with. They had found the white Corvette. They had found the white mother of pearl Bussy. They had found the white mother of pearl button that was missing, and then the bloodstains in the car that matched her. In May of 2000, the police find the black van. Yates had installed a homemade platform bed covered with carpet. The carpet, padding, and underlying wood all tested positive for blood. And they were able to identify Ellis and Murfin's blood in that van. They found 3 bullet holes. They found spent bullets. And then they also found bullet debris that contained Smith's DNA from that last one. In his house, they found records of at least 3 guns, 122 and 225s, used in the murders of Johnson, Oster, Wasson, and Mavin. Ellis was killed with a different 25, the same one that was used to murder Murfin and wound Smith, and I think he had tried to sell that one or got rid of it somehow. Other evidence established that at the point that Mercer and Ellis were last seen alive, because they were over in Tacoma, that Yates had been in Tacoma on National Guard duty at Fort Lewis. He had done, normally you have to do 20 years, I think, to kind of retire out of the military. He had done 18 and a half, but they were at the time trying to lessen their numbers, so they had given him the opportunity to retire at full pension at 18 and a half years, which he decided to do. In his closet, they found a jacket identified as the one that Smith was wearing on the night that Yates robbed and shot her. In the laundry room, they found a canvas coat with a stain that was later identified as Mercer's blood. And using a map that Yates had drawn, they were able to excavate an area on the east side of his house under his bedroom window. And that is where they found Melody Ann Murfin, who was 43.
He lives, the house in question is not far away from me, and I may have driven past it just to see where it was.
This area had previously been searched, but she wasn't found until Yates told them where she was. And she was found on October 18th of 2000, but she had disappeared in 98. So she had been under that window. And, you know, some reports say that when he buried her, his wife was in the bed sleeping. That was like right next to that.
Could you even imagine being the wife finding out that some woman is buried in your fucking yard?
Absolutely not. And then he put like flowers and things over it, and it was right there. And, you know, somebody had asked him how he could sleep with her right there outside of his window. And his response was, she isn't right there. She's 4 feet down. Fuck this guy. So semen collected overall tied him to Mercer, Scott, Johnson, Oster, Mavin, and Derning. Hairs found on the bodies further connected him to Mercer and Mavin. So one of the reasons why he gave up the Susan Savage and Patrick Oliver murders, as well as telling them where Murfin was a plea deal that would keep him from having to go to death row. But Ellis and Mercer happened in Pierce County, and the Pierce County DA would not make a deal with him to remove the death penalty from those cases. In October of 2002, he was convicted and sentenced to death by lethal injection. On September 5th of 2008, death warrant was signed with a date of execution set for September 19th, 2008. On November 11th, so essentially a week before his scheduled execution date, Washington Supreme Court Justice Jerry Alexander issued a stay of execution to allow the defense time to file additional appeals. And it's one of the reasons why, you know, I'm a pretty avid anti-death penalty-er. I think it's worse for them to have to sit and rot in jail and have no life. But then you get into some of these cases, and I'm like, well, this guy's one I think we could certainly do without. But also, one of the reasons why a lot of proponents that are anti-death penalty is because of the immense drain of resources on the system and how much they cost for these assholes to fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. One of the things that they claimed, obviously, was that he was saying, okay, because of my extreme paraphilia for wanting to have sex with corpses, obviously I'm insane. But it didn't, like I said, didn't work in his benefit. But in 2014, our governor, Jay Inslee, instituted a moratorium on death penalty cases. Yeah, so basically it was saying, like, not saying that people were not guilty or shouldn't be executed, but it was just like there were no executions happening at that time. And then in 2018, Washington abolished the death penalty 10 years after he was supposed to be executed. So again, this guy is lucky. I mean, and he just bid his time. So in the end, he has been sentenced to 408 years without the possibility of parole. One of the, I think, saddest things about this case is, and I've heard her daughter speak about it, was that Murfin, the one that was found buried in the yard, they actually saved that case. They didn't prosecute him on that one because they had made the deal not to do the death penalty. And in case anything went wrong with those cases, they wanted the Murfin case held out because that was the one that they had the most. I mean, they found the body in the yard. Correct. Yeah. And so they were saving that one. Now, once Pierce County convicted him and he had been given the death penalty, they never charged him, as far as I know, and went to trial over Murfin. You know, they do this a lot in these cases where once they get sentenced to so many death penalties, it's like, oh, well, we don't want the expense to the taxpayers of having another trial. He's already going to die. Be happy with that. but not if it's your loved one. It's like, because she's the strongest case, her daughter has to be like, there's no, and really, you know, again, yeah, it's so unfair. So, you know, we wanted to make sure that we named every single one of the victims in this podcast because they were mothers and daughters, and with Patrick Oliver, a son. They were, yeah, from children up until, you know, middle age, and none of them deserved what happened to them. Robert Lee Yates is still in Walla Walla, where he was once a guard. He is now a prisoner. And scary enough, he is there also with Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, who we'll be doing an episode on at a later date.
We're done. Thanks for listening, guys. Like, subscribe. Follow us on Instagram.
We'll have info for our Patreon.
Yes. Thanks for supporting us. We love you all with all my little heart.
Bye.
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 Thanks for listening to this week's episode. We put out new episodes every single Wednesday, and if you're impatient like me, be sure to become a Patreon where you can get your episodes early each week. For as little as $5 a month, you not only significantly support the production of this podcast, but you'll also get ad-free episodes in addition to them being early. For pictures, videos, and links related to this episode, be sure to check out our Instagram at threesacrime. And for more information, go to threesacrime.com.